Thanks for talking with us, Drew. I can call you Drew, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. So let's just go ahead and get started. So let's talk about the early days first. I'm going to go ahead and admit person. Okay, so when did Fark get started? You mentioned that you had the site domain name a couple of years before you launched the site. If you'd like to tell us about how it got started.
Yeah. So my first business, right out of college, my entire work history working for other people is 9 months. I mean, other than the college and high school jobs. Got out of college, had a job, wasn't that great. Friend of mine convinced me to start up a dial-up internet service provider in Frankfort, Kentucky. And so I was doing that 9 months later, and working on it pretty much full time. And the sort of the origin of Fark was like Fark wouldn't exist if I didn't have that company, because I couldn't have afforded to host it anywhere. It was so expensive at the time. But 1997, I was reading, I think it was a Wired article saying that 4-letter domain names were almost gone. And I was like, wow, like that sounded crazy back in 1997. I was like, how did they use them all up? Like, who got them all? So I went and looked. I tested out a few to see, like, I'm pretty sure I looked at drew.com and that wasn't available, but Fark was. So I grabbed it because I was like, you know what, someday I'm going to have an idea for a website, and I will put it there. So, but I didn't have an idea for a website at the time. So that earlier that day, somebody had mailed me an image of a squirrel with giant balls. And so I just put that there, and that's what was there for about 18 months till I came up with the idea for Fark. And that's how we got it going.
Yeah, that's kind of serendipitous, because Fark's a good memorable name. It's short, it's really punchy.
It's also interesting too, because it's incredible for a trademark perspective, because it's not an English word. So a few years ago, we got a notice from the USPTO saying that our trademark had become oh God, I always forget. It's not incontrovertible. It's incontestable. Incontestable. And my IP attorney was like, I don't know what that means. I had to look it up. It means that no one can contest it because it's not an English word. There's no other use for it. And we're out there. But it is showing up. It's got to be a word in Hindi, because there's a guy who actually wrote a song called Fark out there in their entertainment industry. And then it shows up, I think it means strange in Norwegian and Turkish, which is an interesting combo. But other than that, nobody's using it.
It's a good, that meaning of strange is a good match for many of your links.
Yeah, it kind of works. Yeah, it was a complete accident, though. I can't take credit for it.
So how did you learn about the internet, and what were your early experience with it? How did you think about it at the time?
Yeah, so this was weird, man. Like, I was on super early. So I was a freshman in college in 1991, and I went to, so I live in Kentucky now, and I was born and raised here. And it's a complete coincidence that I still live here. I hated it. I wanted to leave. Like, a short version about that is it got way better, and it's kind of nice, at least the part I live in. But anyway, so I'm going to college in Iowa, like rural Iowa, which sounds redundant. But like, it's the northeastern corner of the state at a little place called Luther College, and I didn't have a car. And I mean, I felt like I was on the damn moon. I came home for Christmas that year, and my friends who all had computers and were already in the BBS scene were telling me about, we'll just get an internet account and we'll be able to email each other. And I was like, okay, great. So I went down to the computer lab, and I was the 4th person to ask for an internet account at the college. They'd had it for a couple of years, just nobody really was doing anything. And but the problem was that I got involved in MUDs pretty early and in coding MUDs, and that actually is how I ended up in computer science, as it turns out. But they had one modem line, and I told too many people about what all the cool stuff you could do online, and so all of a sudden I couldn't get online. So it didn't really work out for me. But yeah, so I was on the web before, or on the internet before the web, and in fact had an interesting conversation. So I logged into ISCA, which was a big bulletin board set up out of Iowa, University of Iowa at the time. Think like Usenet, but local, I guess, is kind of the way to think about it. And I remember having a conversation with some people. I was like, so other than like MUDs and ISCA, I was like, what else is there to do on the internet? And they're like, yeah, I guess that's it. that's the end. And I was like, oh, okay, great. So it was really weird when the web showed up, and I was like, oh, there's like pictures now. This is going to work out pretty good.
Yeah, the web, Tim Berners-Lee, if I remember the facts right, hosted World Wide Web, which was the original name of the first browser, Christmas Day 1990.
Yeah.
And that really started. And for a while, we got along with WinSock, it's like trumpet WinSock and things like that. And then,
oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, Microsoft made WinSock part of Windows 95, and
there were all kinds of weird technologies out there. Like a lot of people forget that like today it's pretty much the web for the most part, but there was all kinds of stuff out there. Like you remember Gopher out of yeah. So Gopher could have been the entire internet, except they had some really terrible timing. Right when the web launched, they decided to go to a pay model because they were going broke hosting it is why. So it wasn't like they made a bad call. They just couldn't do anything else. And just weird coincidences like led to who won and who lost in that. It was very strange.
Yeah. Okay. Well, talk a little about old websites. Are there any, first old websites, long-lived websites, I should say, that are still around that you still like or still are interested in or admire? And are there any old websites that are sort of have gone away, that aren't around anymore, and you think really should have stayed, that you miss? I mean,
yeah, that's a good question, because like part of the thing is the minute that like, so Fark started in 1999, and then comments got added in the summer of 2000, and then as soon as that fired up, this is going to sound really weird considering what I do for a living, but I've never really been a huge fan of online discussion boards, which is probably one of the reasons why Fark works, because I never cared to be the center of it. So it was more fun to just let people do whatever they wanted. But so I wasn't really involved in a lot of the other ones, but I was just thinking the other day of like, the original Space Jam website and Zombo.com, and Chewbacca Ate My Balls was one of my favorite ones. I like that one a lot. And of course, Homestar Runner. I mean, you can't, and then they're still around. Actually, they're still kicking around.
Yeah, they're in my state. Yeah. Some other ones. Let's see. It was Real Ultimate Power, the ninja site.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. And Red versus Blue for a while too. There was a lot of like early sites that kind of took off because we threw links at them. Here's actually a really funny story. So the reason Pandora ever became a viable company is because one of our moderators was trying to interview there. And this was at the time where Pandora's original concept for a company is they developed an algorithm that could tell if a song was going to be a hit. And they tried to sell it to the entertainment industry in Hollywood, and they didn't want any part of it because they didn't believe it and they wanted to take credit for it and whatever. So they were in the middle of a pivot to become a music recommendation engine. One of our moderators applied for a job there and was talking about us, and they asked if we could send a link to him. And I was like, yeah, I guess. What do they do? And he's like, well, it's actually a really cool technology. You click like on some songs, and then they're going to tell you what other songs you like. And I was like, oh, sounds pretty good. So like years later, I was in business school at Cal, and the founder was there giving a talk, and he said something like it blew up during the summer of whatever. And we don't know why that happened, because I guess nobody told him. But I checked, and yeah, it was us. We threw 40 to 80,000 people at it in the afternoon, and it was a good product. I mean, everybody freaking used it back in the beginning, right? So yeah, kind of worked out.
Someone in chat mentioned there was a MetaFilter post about the whole X ate my balls genre of websites.
Yeah. Han Solo ate my balls, I think. And you remember Evil Bert? That was the other one. Evil Bert was one.
Bert is evil. Yeah, I've been making a list of these sites for some future project. Mr. T ate my balls, I think, is the canonical one.
Mr. T, yes, that's right. Yeah.
So how about departed sites? Do you remember any that you wish were still around?
So there were a bunch, actually. Like I saw somebody in the comments mentioned Plastic, which is a good one too. There were a number of sites that were kind of like Fark, like they weren't clones. It was obviously people just putting stuff together, but all of them collapsed for various reasons. And several of them I remember specifically was the person running the site was either trying to date people on it or trying to be the God Emperor or something. It was actually something, it's sort of a classic like community mistake 101.
Oh, that's right. Thinking something awful.
Yeah, something awful. Yeah, exactly. Although Lotax never really thought it was about him. I believe it or not, actually, like I used to have lots of conversations with the guy. But it was more to the point, like communities and fan bases are totally different animals. And so many people who find themselves in charge of a community make the critical error of thinking that they own a fan base. And I'm thinking about Kevin Rose and Elon Musk. they don't function the same way. No one's on Twitter for Elon Musk, and he thinks they are. It's kind of a problem.
Yeah.
It's the easiest way to destroy a community.
We'll get back to around to Musk in a bit. Plastic.com was the web discussion forum I was on before MetaFilter.
Yeah, and there was suck.com that was around, and I mean there was a 5-letter one. Like there were a few actually, like they were okay. Like if I wasn't running one, I probably would have participated in some of the other ones, but I was just too busy with my own thing. So yeah, board.com mentioned in the comments there. Aaron said it. Yeah. Yeah, there's a ton.
Let's see. Some other you were around, of course, during the MySpace and LiveJournal period of beginning of social media. If Facebook hadn't come up out ahead, yeah, I mean, at the time, everyone knew at the time that whichever social media site pulled out in the head and could be used by normal people, grandmothers and aunts and uncles and such, that it would become dominant. And that's what basically happened with Facebook. And then we know how that turned out.
It is. I have a different perspective on that, though. I think that's not how it naturally works. Because if you think about like the ecosystems before that, usually anybody that like became super huge only had about a 5-year run. Like think like CompuServe and AOL, and even MySpace for a little bit. Like I think the normal runs about 5 years. The aberration is that Facebook bucked the trend, and they kind of did it by buying other sites that were coming up. So like it would have been Instagram's turn 5 years after Facebook got big, except they bought them. And they managed to and then they just got a stranglehold on the entire industry. But it's very unusual up till that point. Like even like Twitter, I think Twitter would have died if Trump hadn't become president and been using it. I think it would have been abandoned 5 years ago or 8 years ago, however long it was. Jeez.
Yeah. Well, whereas now, if Trump ever stops using it again, I'll be gone.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you block Trump, everyone would talk about what Trump is doing, and eventually, I just couldn't really put up with it anymore.
We Fark during that time had really struggled, but if you want to do this chronologically, we got to talk about that later. But yeah, like right around the time Trump came in, the problem was the news cycle shifted to something even I was struggling with. It was rough.
Let's move on to Fark for now. Fark is still very popular. Yeah. I don't know how is it compared to say the early 2000s? Is it more or less popular? And
Fark, well, so we had sort of a plateau. Actually, it's probably about the same. Like page view wise, we're 2/3 the size that we were at our height. Audience wise, we're at 1 million right now, where at one point we had 4. But I mean, considering it's been a 25-year run, 1 million's fine. That's still pretty big. I'm cool with it.
Okay. You mentioned in our pre-talk that Fark has a surprisingly large user base of Zoomers.
Yeah.
If you'd like to speculate or maybe speak authoritatively on why that is.
Yeah, so this happened because one of the fun things about being Fark is that occasionally I'll get cold emailed by people who run companies doing interesting technology stuff, and I normally don't answer those, but if I ever get one from somebody who's a Farker, I answer that 100% of the time because I feel like they're not going to lie to me. And also too, usually whatever technological product they've got, and it's usually an ad tech thing. Ad tech stuff doesn't really work well on our site because we're a different beast. But to have somebody who owns an ad tech company be the one who's going to be running the integration, like, and understand what we do and why we're different, that helps a ton. So I had a friend of mine, he's a friend of mine now, called me, God, it was before the pandemic, 2019, let's say. And he basically had it was a really cool, like non-privacy busting thing. Instead of trying to figure out who everybody was, it tried to guess who they were without knowing, which I like a lot better. Like think like Arbitron or whatever, or Nielsen, where, you've got a demographic, but you don't really it's not privacy invasive, it's predictive. And I thought this was really, really cool. But so we took a look at this thing, and it turns out that, that technology identified that we have a substantial Gen Z population, and it's actually very, very strange. So about half of the audience on Fark is over 50 years old, and the other half is under 35. And I didn't misspeak. There's a big donut. I mean, you can tell who was on Facebook, basically. It's really wild because like the Zoomers are filling in on the back end. And yeah, we just lost the millennials, man. Like they just, I guess they were on Facebook or something, but yeah, super weird. And so what was funny is that when I found that out, I sent that to the moderating team and I was like, guys, check this out. And they're like, that's what's going on. And I was like, what do you mean? And they said, well, we just thought people were getting dumber. Like we could not understand why people didn't know about these things. And it's like, oh, it's because they're 30. Oh, okay. So yeah, it's really interesting. I think the reason why it's happening, well, there's a couple reasons. One is that there was a time where it made no sense to tell people had they heard of Fark. And I'm talking like 10 years ago, because they probably had. Not to like make that sound like it's a big deal, but that's why people you wouldn't be like, hey, have you heard of this thing? Be like, yeah, we all know about it. But what's happened is we've been around long enough to where we've gone legacy, to the point where now there's the second generation that's like, they have not heard of us. And what they like is they like the fact that there's no algorithm trying to burrow into their brain to piss them off or to get them to stay on the site and forego sleep. They like the site is not needy as a result. And they really, really like it. The feedback I usually get is I can read the news and I can have fun again. And that's cool. I like hearing that. It's neat.
Now, how large of an operation is Fark?
Not very, actually. We have 5 full-time employees. I'm not sure because there's always various states of sometimes people will go get a full-time job and like side hustle with us, which is kind of how I prefer to do it. Cause like we have needs in spurts. So there isn't like, I mean, for me and for like the core of the 2 other people, like, yeah, there's pretty much like, there's 80 hours a week worth of stuff we could probably get on, but the rest of it, like coding stuff, it like sort of comes and goes depending on how that goes. So it's a very small group. Moderation staff is about 25, but we've got a ton of tools on the back end that kind of help out. So it ends up being enough people to do an okay job at it. I mean, I like it. I mean, it's not perfect by any stretch, but nobody is. I feel like we try harder anyway. So yeah.
You've branched off into live streaming as well.
Has
that helped with the site popularity? So spread the word?
Well, it's interesting. So not yet. And part of the reason is because when I started doing the live streaming, it was 2020. And I was working with a friend of mine who's since jumped off because his personal life has gotten a little too busy. And he decided that he said that he thought that Twitch might be the place to do it. We're actually live streaming on Twitch right now, which is kind of fun. Part of the reason why that seemed like a good idea was because at the time Twitch was saying they wanted to do non-video game content. They have since decided they don't want to do non-video game content. So it's been kind of a loss, but we still do pick up people. Like I know of I'd say several people like, and that's not a huge number, but that don't come to Fark, but found the live stream and they just watch that because it's a nice little sort of weekly download of all the good stuff. And it's all the fun stuff too. Like it isn't usually the important things. It's usually these edge case weird stories. So it's been a lot of fun, but at some point on my to-do list, we're going to jump over to YouTube, but I'm really kind of waiting. I need somebody who's looking for a show to pick us up and throw us in a network. Cause like I'm doing it all myself and I'm not good at it. I mean, and I don't mean like I can pick the material, I can present the material. What I can't do is run the board and all that. Like my brain explodes every time I do it. So it would be great if somebody else did that, but it's a fun little sort of thing to do. And it's got its own fan base. It's kind of neat.
Oh, okay. Do you still like decide all the links that appear on Fark, or do you have a team helping you? How do you decide which submissions make it to the front page?
Yeah, so I've been doing this for 24 years now, and there have been times where it's been extremely hard to do. Trump administration was pretty rough. There's other times too, like I went to grad school in 2011 and 2012, and that eats up a lot of your time. So I have stepped away from it occasionally in the past, but one thing that I noticed, and it was the last big time I did it, it's about 10 years ago, I noticed that when I run the site, when I post all the links, and I only do it right now between 7 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern time, which is the bulk of the news cycle, really, if you think about it. But is I know everything. Like I know everything that's going on. I know, and what's also fun is that when you know that much stuff, you can sort of predict like how soon things are about to happen. Like it's a whole like other meta discussion of like the way that I watch the news. Like I pay more attention to why are we hearing about this now than I do what the thing is. But so anyway, I've discovered that I more or less do need to do it. I mean, I like it also, but when I do it, I know everything. So continuing to keep that pace up works pretty well. But I've got some guys, basically I do it Monday through Thursday, and then Friday is big projects time. So basically at that point, because man, like checking the news cycle every, even when nothing's going on, it's like getting punched in the head. Uh, it really knocks your concentration out. So it's one of those, like, it's nice to have a break and to be able to think about sort of the bigger ticket issues. But yeah, I still do it. And I borrowed an idea that I learned in grad school, which was kind of fun, about how tech companies do 3 shifts by, instead of like having like a morning and evening and an overnight shift, they just deploy people in different parts of the world. So our late night person is on the West Coast, and she stays up pretty late. And then our overnight guy is in Germany. And so basically his day is my overnight. And basically I wait, he runs it until I wake up at around 7 o'clock in the morning. And then he just passes it off to me and we just keep it going.
Yeah, that's a cool idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
How about how Fark has managed to remain profitable all this time? How do you, like MetaFilter, our home site, subsists almost entirely on donations. We're trying to diversify that model a bit. Let's see, we just had a big fundraiser back in November. How does Fark navigate the financial waters?
Yeah, so we started a subscription model in 2002. And part of the reason for that was there were no ads until 2005. And even after ads showed up, they didn't pay that. They still don't pay that much, but they really, really did not pay that much in 2005. So we were more or less funded by the subscription part of the site. I mean, still to this day, kind of like I'd say it's about half the revenue. But we could not function without it. Like there's absolutely no way. What's also wild is like, what we've noticed is the thing that we struggle with a lot is that people are absolutely willing to sign up, but they got to have a reason. And boy, coming up with reasons is really hard, because it's like, hey, because it's great, because you like this place. And, and then every once in a while we've gotten in trouble. Like when the pandemic hit, we were like, okay, everybody, guess what? Like all the companies have just pulled their ad spending. Like it's gone to zero. So we need some help. And I hate doing that one because it's like the bearer of bad news type situation. But I will say this, the key to remaining profitable, don't spend money. I mean, it's just straight up like right there. We don't spend money. I mean, that's basically it. Like there's no extravagance. There's no crazy stuff. I live in Kentucky, which helps because I don't have to pay myself a California salary. But I will say that we're experimenting with other sort of novel methods. So for example, on one of the revenue streams we added, which is not huge by any stretch, but not insubstantial either, is we have never allowed cussing on Fark. And that's mostly a joke because I don't care. Like I tend to not cuss myself, but I don't care. We did it just to mess with people, like literally back from day one, like in 2000 when we coded the comment section. But because you can't cuss, one of the things that we activated is there's a swear jar functionality now, where basically you want to be able to cuss. You can throw $1 in the swear jar and we'll let you go nuts in an entire post. And not only that, but it'll put little cupids around the outside of it with trumpets coming out of their butts. So you'll stand out a little more too. And when I did that, if there was I always go to the subscription guys, the total Farkers, and I always propose the ideas to them. And I told them about this swear jar, and they're like, yeah, okay, that's great. But they're like, man, $1 to cuss, like that's too much. And I said, yeah, it is. I said, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to use pricing so the people don't do it all the time. Cause I don't want to see it. Like, I don't want every post to have F-bombs in it. I want it to be really special. I want somebody to be like, damn it, I'm so mad, I'm going to pay $1. And it's really fun when it happens too. Cause like January 6th, 2021, we had that enabled, and man, that funded a month right there by itself. So, it kind of works out. I've got a couple of other ideas coming too, down the pike, but it's just the thing about having been around for 24 years is there's not a huge sense of urgency to get anything done. Cause at this point, like I just turned 50. I kind of am starting to think this might be the rest of the way, so I got a couple of other ideas, and then maybe we'll roll those out in the next year or two. I don't know. We'll get around to it. It'll be fine.
Maybe MetaFilter should consider a swear jar.
Yeah. We'll have to collaborate, by the way, too. Hey, here's an interesting little bit of trivia too. Reddit Gold is exactly an identical copy of Total Fark. And I don't mean they copied it. I mean, they called me and they asked me, what did you do? And I told them. So that's where that came from, by the way.
I feel like we're talking to like one of the secret pillars of the internet here.
I have been in the back room of so many wild things. I wrote a book for Fark's 25th anniversary. And honestly, like, I hope I can say this and sound at least somewhat humble, but it kind of blew my mind. All of the things that I had been kind of in the room for. It was super weird, man. Super weird.
Yeah, I had actually the books on the list here. So that was the first. You've had one book so far, if I'm not mistaken, and you're working on a second.
Yeah, and it's actually done. I wrote a book on. So the first book that was a kind of a funny experience. People who have read it are kind of shocked at what's in there. Now it's mostly funny, and it's kind of like the initial pitch of the idea of the book. This is 2006. Was, oh, let's just like talk about like the funniest like stories that have ever been on Fark. And so I was like, yeah, okay, sure. But me and the editor were talking, and she was like, well, you got to come up with a categorization method. And I was like, okay, well, how about like we do like media tropes, like news media tropes? And she's like, what do you mean? I goes, well, like fear mongering is a big one. What if, like my best example of that one is like when they used to, I don't even know if they do this or not, but they do like the bumper while you're waiting for the evening news to come on, and they'd be like, can this common household object kill you? Tune in at 11 to find out. And the answer is no, because if it was yes, they would have said, hey, like boil water advisories, they just roll those. They don't say which counties have to boil water or you're going to all die. Find out at 11. Like they don't do that. So that's how you can know they're winding you up. So I wrote down what I thought was a bunch of categories of stuff, and it turned out like I kind of nailed it, and to the point where, but this didn't work out for me. So what happened is that we had all of this when this book came out, I had tons of media coverage like already queued up. Like I was going to do interviews. I was going to be on Letterman. Like it was great. And the Letterman thing would have happened except for literally the week I was supposed to go on. Two people who worked for him in his Montana ranch tried to kidnap his baby kid. So they went dark for a month, and then they never called me back. And I was like, damn it. But what happened is all of the news companies canceled. And it was weird because it was like one after the other. I'd be like, hey, I'll be there Friday. And they're like, oh, you know what? We got to bump you. And they all canceled. It was very strange. And so years later, I was talking to a friend of mine in Legacy Media about it. And he said, oh, I'll tell you what happened. He goes, here's the problem. He goes, I cannot have you on my network to talk about why we're crap, especially when you're right. Like, I don't know. We're not having that conversation, dude. But when he said that, is like, especially when you're right, I was like, oh, because that's what the book did. It kind of called him out. Like, here's how the sauce is made. And it was dead on. But what an uncomfortable conversation for them to have. So I kind of get it. It makes sense that's why they didn't have me on. So hopefully a history of Fark will like be something they want to touch, but because I'm not indicting them this time. So we'll see.
Gotta find this book.
Yeah, it's around. I think like $2 on Kindle or something because it's been out for a while.
Actually, before I think it's actually the teens.
Yeah, $5 apparently. Somebody's looked it up in the comments.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Maybe they're overcharging me for some reason. I don't know.
No. Well, you'll definitely laugh.
my Amazon's pricing algorithm is.
Yeah. There's that too. They think you want it, they'll jack up the rates.
Yeah. You talk about Google. You talk about Fark. It uses ads, but it's not the big part of your income, correct?
Yeah, like the problem with it is man, I hate them. I mean, I would get rid of them if I could, but I can't. Like that's the problem is I really don't like them. But I actually spent the last year kind of like doing a deep dive because like up until the last 12 months and kind of still, but advertising has never done particularly well on Fark for some reason. So I basically threw myself at it and I was like, well, I'm going to teach myself ad tech because the hell with it. So I did a super deep dive on it, found out some interesting stuff. And this kind of makes sense, but it turns out we found out that Fark, so internet advertising more or less launched around 2005. And that's also when Fox bought MySpace. And all of a sudden, that's when Web 2.0 pretty much started, was like that month. Advertising kicked off right around then. And it turns out, that summer was when Google launched AdSense. And we were in the original crop of companies that was on it. Like the first 12 guys, it was us and like Boing Boing. And I think Reddit might've been in there. Dig was sure in there. Anyway, we found out, long story short, that we are in a lot of block lists. And it's kind of funny because, like, if you go to Fark today, literally nothing on our site is worth putting in a block list. Like, now, we were considered edgy back in 2005, and maybe we were, but I feel like we haven't moved and everybody else went to hell. That's what happened, because I haven't changed anything. It's kind of like if you think about like Playboy, like in the 1950s, Playboy was like, "Ooh, man, there's titties." Oh no. And then by the time, like 2005 rolls around, we're like, yeah, whatever, who cares? There's like, you can't even find nudity on the internet anymore. It's all porn. I mean, they got totally lapped by what everybody wanted to do. Same thing happened with us, but one thing I discovered is that so in 2005, they also created the first block lists, and they put us on all of them, and we stayed there because nobody edits those things. And it wasn't everybody, but about half of the ad networks we had some kind of a block on us. But it was really fun because, like, I basically called them up, like, hey, we're not bad. Can you take us out? And they're like, I actually had one, because again, like Zoomers are taking over, and I had one that they'd never heard of us, or the fact that we've been around for 20 years. And one of them said, so, like, do you have any credentials or whatever that would prove that you guys are legitimate? And I was like, I got a bunch. I was like, I told them the Jeopardy thing, but we were one of the first 5 websites put into the Digital Library of Congress. And they were like, oh, okay, well, that sounds legit. I was like, yeah, we're good. So it was super weird. So we made some progress, but it was a hill to climb.
Yeah, there's Wi-Fi at one restaurant around here I encountered once, where every website I could think of was on a block list for some reason.
Yeah,
MetaFilter was on their block list because it was an internet discussion board, and I couldn't think of any website that could get through their block lists. Everything was blocked.
Yeah.
Anyway,
It's changed a little bit now. Like, it's a little bit easier to get off of those things. Like, and now I've got a whole list of people to call if it ever happens again. But yeah, they just don't like. I think part of the problem is everybody maintaining one of those. Well, there's no central authority, and then it is rare that anybody would come off of one if you think about it. So there's really no motivation for them to do it. But it kind of worked out. I had the ad networks do it. I was like, guys, I think we're making like half the revenue we would be. So why don't you make that call? Why don't you tell them to do something about it? And they did. So it worked out.
Since we're talking about ads, let's go to the 2 times that Google AdSense, what was it that they disabled their ads on Fark? Was that it?
Yeah. So, like, prior to literally just this year, and this sounds nuts because we've been around for 24 years, but didn't really pay attention to the ad side of things because it was like, I mean, our traffic doesn't really change day to day. So I'm not going to see anything by looking there every day. And so at one point, I think this is around 2016, Meg, who's my head developer, happened to look and noticed that we were getting no ad revenue. We hadn't gotten any for a week. And it turned out that Google had shut us off. They said they emailed us, but we never got anything from them. And so I called everybody I knew over Google and basically screamed at them. And what they eventually said is they had something like, well, they kept on changing the answer. Actually, the one that we finally got closest to was they sent a thread that had an image of a woman. And they said, this image has too much side boob. And I said, okay, how much is too much? Is it 50%? Is it 75? Like, and they're like, oh, we can't tell you. And I was like, so you're demanding that I be in compliance with rules that you can't explain to me. So I went off on them. I basically said, look, man, I'm just going to go up the chain until everybody gets fired. And here's the weird thing about that. So they cut me a refund. They had our ads off for 8 weeks. And when I tell people that story, most media companies know of other sites that got shut off, because this is what Google used to do. If you were out of compliance, they would shut all your ads off, like all your revenue. So this happened to a lot of people. They just didn't talk about it. And but literally nobody knew anybody that ever got refunded until us. But the second time it happened was dumber. This was about 2018 or so. And it happens again. But the problem this time is that literally none of the people I screamed at the last time are there. And not only that, but since then, Google's like apparently moved the entire ad department into like a black box in a basement somewhere, that even friends of mine who worked at Google in Mountain View didn't even know what building it was in, or anybody that worked for them, or how to contact them. And apparently, and this is how I know Google is a monopoly. Apparently, the process at the time is that you needed to go find a white knight and then have them somehow like run into those guys in the cafeteria and be like your white knight, basically like bringing your case to them about why they ought to like turn your ad revenue back on. And so what happened was I had everybody I knew crawling around trying to find these dudes. And the one guy over at Google that found him was the guy I knew the least. It was just some random guy that was trying to get me to buy ads. And he found him. And the problem is that their other sort of like their methodology at the time is that once somebody contacts them, that dude's your rep. That's not the guy I wanted as my rep. I didn't know him. He didn't know me. Didn't want to, deal with this. It was just too much. So finally we end up, and it was like every time we had to communicate, I had to send him an email. He would send it to them. They would sit on it for 2 days. They would write back. And so what they said is you have a lot of images out of compliance. And I'm like, great, where are they? And they said, we can't tell you. And I'm like, how am I going to fix it? So finally they sent us a list of 8 images. And one of them in particular, they said, this is child pornography. And I was like, well, we have almost 1 billion comment pages. I mean, that maybe there's one on there. Like, God, I hope not. So I go look, and it's an image of a porn star. I find this out later because basically it's a clothed image of a porn star called Little Lupe. And the reason why the clothed image of this woman was in the thread was because we were linking to an article about a guy, and you want to talk about ironic, who came to the United States and came into Miami from Colombia or Venezuela, and he bought a bunch of pornography DVDs down there, and he got dinged because she was on the cover and they thought she was underage. Well, she wasn't, but he went to jail because he couldn't prove that she wasn't. Eventually she found out and actually came down and testified at his trial. Meanwhile, that's the article we linked to, and they're dinging us for a clothed image of this woman. And I was just like, are you guys kidding me? And then they said, oh, well, we found 200 more. And I'm like, just stop. And so finally I was like, all right, I'm just going to go nuclear. So I called CNN, I called Fox News, called MSNBC, and I said, guys, I need an article written about this. These guys are screwing me. And they were happy to, because they've had problems with them too. So they could basically make the complaint without having to be part of it. And basically Fox News, I got to hand it, they're not my favorite guys, but they wrote the most damaging version of that article, making Google look like a bunch of like criminal sycophants. And honestly, I was kind of agreeing with him by the time that happened. So what happened was after that went into the public eye, then I started getting calls from real execs over there. And one of them in particular was like one of the head guys over there. He's like, yeah, we've been thinking about changing the process. And I'm like, yeah, you really should. And what they changed it to now, and what it still is to this day is that if you have an image or something that's out of compliance, they block the page, not the entire website. And what an innovation that is. Can't believe they didn't start with that. But I'll tell you why. It's because they're monopoly. They don't have to. They don't have to care.
Yeah. Oh, some time ago there was the Google Panda update.
Yeah.
Which, from what I remember, MetaFilter actually got hit pretty hard by that a couple of times.
Yes.
Actually, for a while, it's very difficult to find any MetaFilter pages on Google, and I don't even think it's that great now. How did that affect Fark? Did it change since then?
So I worked on the back end of that problem too, as it turns out. I was actually sort of coordinating so we didn't get dinged by that, which was interesting. I know why MetaFilter did. It was because of the answers thing. So the change that they essentially made, and here's my insight into this. So I was sitting next to Matt Cutts, who was the head of the Google search engine, the day they dropped it, because we were at TED and his phone exploded. And I know him because he's from Kentucky. And I mean, and he was just gone. Like the whole rest of the afternoon, it was ring, ring, ring. Like, oh my God, it's Huffington Post. Oh my God, it's the Washington Post. Oh my God, it's New York Times. And when he explained what they had done, basically what had happened was that Demand Media was one of the culprits here, but a lot of other sites had kind of figured out that if you just kind of wrote a page about anything, you could have a long tail effect, which would be like if you did top 10 best pastrami sandwiches along with top 10 best, snorkel gear, top 10 best female celebrities from 1850, and you had some kind of a garbage article written about that Google would eventually hit that like 2 or 3 times. And if you had 1 billion of these, and this was literally Demand Media's like business model, that you would be able to, you would get enough traffic from Google to stay afloat. Google hated this, however, because most of these articles were garbage and not useful. And so, it basically, it was exploiting a weakness in their search algorithm. And so when they launched Panda, the idea was that, as Matt Cutts said, he's like, the whole point, like what we're really trying to do with the search engine is we want you to find the answer to what you're looking for and have it be well written. He's like, so when people ask me about SEO, he says, my answer is just do a good job, do your best and explain things well, and we'll find you. We'll find you a lot. So did it affect Fark at all? It did affect other major media companies, including a couple that friends of mine ran. And we're talking like 80% of traffic gone and not coming back because they meant to get rid of it. Like it wasn't an accident, except in MetaFilter's case. In MetaFilter's case, it was a complete accident. What happened was the MetaFilter answers accidentally was never written to be an SEO siphon, but it did tick all the boxes for pre-panda Google, which was, I have a question that I type into Google and it'd be like, damn, MetaFilter's got the answer already. And so what happened was that MetaFilter, and Matt actually told me something along the lines of the one possible exception to their rule, like the guys that were actually doing it really well were MetaFilter. They were writing clear, concise answers. And unfortunately, they got swept up in that whole thing. And that's what happened there. And it sucked a lot. He said he tried like hell to turn it around and try to help and do what he could, but obviously, but that's what happened is it would turn out that the really good section of MetaFilter that actually had answers to things accidentally got caught in this dragnet. And it really sucked for MetaFilter. I remember when that went down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Things like this, do you think Google has too much power now?
Well, I mean, they always did. I mean, but it's hard to say because like it's not that they're being jerks with it, but they're just so big they don't care. They almost completely killed off mainstream media before realizing that if that goes away, there's nothing to search for. I mean, and now they actually, like, literally, I think it was like a year and a half ago, they created a news media outreach team. These guys have been around as long as we have. I mean, they literally make all their money off of monetizing things. And then they just realize, oh, you know what? We take all the traffic away from the news guys. We have nothing to link to. Oh man. Like it took them 20 years to figure that out. So that's really kind of the problem. It's not that they're malevolent. It's that they're too big and they just don't notice.
Yeah. There are some things you can search on for Google for which you really, in the old days, it was almost magical. If you search for something on Google, like the first hit or two would always be something really relevant to what you're looking for. Now there are a lot of things, especially tech things, that maybe some medical things and car things too. I don't know. That if you search for it, you really have to hunt because they're so colonized by SEO.
Yeah, that's been a problem. It's been kind of an arms race for forever.
Yeah, but many of them are like transparently bogus sites.
Yeah.
Anyway, sometimes I think that maybe the time is right to go back to something like Yahoo directory.
Maybe. Yeah.
The old days of Google, I remember what I remember is the two things that really differentiated Google was that they were really, really, really good, but also, and I think people forget about this, it was their old "Don't be evil" motto.
Yeah, right.
Which at the time, all the search engines, forgotten names like Excite and Lifecoast and Infoseek. Sorry. Would offer paid search results. If you gave them money, then you could get you could just have them put your site at the top of search results for these terms. And Google refused to do that. And for a while, then they had sponsor links that had like a bright orange box around them. And now the sponsored links are almost indistinguishable from the normal links.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, the problem was is that's a problem with being a public company. You can want to not do evil, but you're not allowed to. So you're kind of stuck.
I remember though when Google went public, they made a lot of noise about trying to do it in a responsible way. That they had like this special agreement when they released shares that they wouldn't do this or this or this. So I wonder if anyone even remembers any of that now.
Yeah, I mean I do, but they also, like, the minute they decided to get away from it, they kind of they just dropped all conversation about it. They're like, oh, we never said that. I don't know what you're talking about. Most of those guys that were involved in that, I mean, I met them at TED in the year like 2009 or so, and I don't think any of them were the company past 2013 or 2014. And it wasn't that they were run out. They just decided, you know what, if you're not going to do the don't be evil thing, then I'm going to go do something else.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to something else. How about let's talk about a couple other big sites. Dig, for example. What happened to Dig?
Yes. So I always had a guess of what happened to Dig, and I'll explain why, because I actually had some sort of insider knowledge about what happened. And so in the process of writing the book about the last 25 years of Fark, I was writing this chapter, and then lo and behold, Jay Adelson pops up out of nowhere with a new startup thing he's working on. And since I had his attention, I was like, dude, could you read this and tell me if I got this right? Because I guessed. I had a big guess about what happened. And I'll tell you what he said in a second. But here's what I guessed it happened. So obviously, like I knew Kevin Rose before Dig. In fact, I was on Tech TV while he was still a host. And he actually showed it to me. He's like, he and a friend were building it. And he's like, don't worry, it's not going to compete with Fark. And I'm like, I don't really care if it does. He's like, because it's got voting and stuff. I'm like, yeah, it's great. That's cool. I hope it works out. And it did. And it was fine. And they were going gangbusters for quite a while. They got bigger and bigger and bigger. Interesting sort of sidebar on that. We tried voting on Fark for a little while, but there's an interesting problem with that. We're comedy based as opposed to relevant based. And so it turns out there's broad disagreement as to what is funny, not amongst just Americans, but just culturally as well. And you can kind of get it. Like when you run into people who say, I don't understand English humor, they really don't. Like there's not that they're not trying to, it's different. So therein lies the problem is that if you want people to vote on what's funny, it's puns and cats. And I don't like puns. I don't mind cats, but I don't want like cats.com. You know, it's not what I'm here for. So anyway, so Dig was coming along and, you know, I was just hearing from those guys off and on, but, you know, they were just going gangbusters. They got venture capital in the door, doing pretty well. So in 2009, I go to TED for the first time and I run into Jay Adelson while I'm there. First time I've ever met this guy. And I walk up and man, he looks like he got run over by a truck. And I was like, dude, what's going on? And he's really cool guy. Like we hit it off. Like we're still on speaking terms to this day, like great guy, very, very smart. Like, and he was the CEO over there with Rose. And he was kind of the functional CEO. I don't know what they would call Rose, but at any rate, Adelson was the guy who was kind of doing the stuff. And he said, well, did you hear about a redesign we got coming up? And I'm like, no. And he said, well, it's bad. And I go, really? What's going on? He's like, it's really bad. He goes like, it's going to kill us. And I was like, so what are you guys doing? He goes, we're getting rid of submitters. And I was like, what? And so what he told me at the time, and I heard it differently, but he told me this, he said that the VCs had become concerned because they'd have a couple of rounds of VC at that point. So I think they were going for like a $230 million valuation. And their problem is that the VCs were concerned that Twitter had come up out of nowhere and was like basically eating their lunch. And they were like, man, we got to do something about this. This is going to be like a big deal. And I'll explain what they did in a second because it was a different conversation. But he said, dude, he's like, we're done, man. He's like, I'm the only person over there that thinks this is a bad idea. And they're going to vote this through and it's going to kill us. And I don't know what I'm going to do about it. And I was like, damn, man. So he's like, well, he's like, here, I'll tell you, he's like, here's how bad it is. He goes, let me hook you up with like one of our outreach guys. Cause he'll give you the pitch on the thing we're trying to do. And then I want you to come back and tell me what sense this makes. And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. No problem. So I saw this guy at South by Southwest the following week and he comes, a real young guy, new hire. And he's like all full of like, you know, this is going to be the future of whatever. And I'm like, great. So pitch me on it. And he goes, so here's what we're going to do. You're going to have your own site on Dig. It'll be dig.com/Fark. I'm like, okay. And he goes, and you're going to publish all of your stuff on there. And I go, all right. Well, why would I do that? And he goes, well, because then people will click on it and then they'll come to Fark. And I was like, okay, but like we're links that don't go to us. So I don't understand how that's going to work. And I said, but furthermore, if I'm the New York Times, how does that work? Like if I'm publishing New York Times articles on your site, like then I'm not clicking on that either. Like I'm reading it there and I'm moving on. And I told him, I was like, I see why you guys want to do this, but I don't understand at all why anybody else would do this. Turns out they did manage to convince about 20 other companies to do it. But in order to make this work, they had to prioritize it. So on day one, like Adelson said, and by the way, Adelson quit before the redesign launched because he's like, they're not hanging this on me. I'm out of here. And he was absolutely right that it was going to kill him, and it did. Part of the reason it killed him was after they did it, they insisted they had changed nothing, which was kind of a problem because they essentially like scrapped the entire site and replaced it with a different site and then said, it's the same. And it wasn't. So as for the why, this is the interesting part. So as for the why, this is my guess, and Adelson confirmed it. There had been rumors the spring before the redesign went around that they'd gotten in front of either Disney or Fox or somebody, and I forget who it was. And they had been offered a $250 or $3 million buyout. It might've been Google. Adelson wrote all this down for me. So I think the reason I don't remember specifically is because just making sure it was one of those three, like you can look it up. That's public record. And then they walked. And the reason they walked was because they had just closed around to VC and the last guys in were only going to make like 2X. And VCs don't like making 2x. They wanted like 4 to 10. And so they were like, nope, they screwed. So Adelson and company got denied an exit because these new guys stuck their feet in and said, no, we're not going to do it. Like, and so the other company walked away, and literally like, that was it. Like they eventually got bought for like, the code base essentially at the end of the day. But so a friend of mine was explaining, this is what happens to venture capitalized companies. And this is part of the reason why we've been around for 24 years. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to make investors happy. I don't have to double my revenue next week. I'm good. Like I own 100% of the company. I can do whatever I want. But if you're a VC backed company, the problem is VCs don't want, like even Twitter is a bad VC company because it's not going to grow. Like they don't want stuff that's not going to grow. They want stuff that's going to grow a lot. And so they will literally sabotage companies that are viable and could probably make money forever. They will literally just kill them because they just don't want it. They don't want that company, even if it's valuable. And that's what they did. And so Adelson's like, yeah, that's what happened. That's exactly what happened. I was like, damn, man. Sorry to hear that.
Well, that's a terrific segue.
Yeah.
To Elon Musk.
Speaking of.
Dig deep in there now. Yeah. Why do you think Musk is, I mean, everyone agrees Musk is making error after error, but you'd think he'd be a reasonably smart guy. I mean, half the internet tells me he's a reasonably smart guy, it seems. Why are they making so many obvious errors?
I'm starting to think he's not a smart guy. That's the only conclusion I can reach. I did see something funny. There's something I've said about news media for a while, which is, if you are an expert in a field and you read an article written by somebody about your field, there are going to be a lot of errors in it. And that's pretty consistent across the board whenever you see that. So the same thing goes for basically what Elon Musk is doing. I saw somebody say the same thing, which is like somebody who's in rocket science was saying, man, I thought he was just bad at rockets, but maybe he was good at electric cars. But now they're like, I'm starting to think that maybe he doesn't know what's going on. Now, I'm not saying he's dumb, but I will say this. It is very clear that he's not reading or researching anything about any of this. He's literally shooting from the hip, because there have been books written about social media and how to run communities. And literally all of them say, don't do what he's doing. And he's not even looking, and he surrounded himself by people that aren't looking either. I mean, it's the most basic amount of research would turn up and tell him the answers to what he wants to do. And I think either he hasn't looked or he doesn't like what he's been reading, one of the two. And part of the problem is I think he also never intended to buy this company, was the other thing. I think it was, he got over his skis a little bit, made an offer that he thought he could get out of. They locked him in, and now he's stuck with this thing. So he's just going to ride it all the way down. That's what I think's going on.
Making all the same mistakes, but just in record time.
Yeah, I mean, I've had this conversation. I'm really good friends with lots of people over at Reddit, including Steve, the CEO. But I've done some work for him in the past few years on really like sort of weird edge case problems they've been having, and I'm really good friends with their community management group. And one of the gals over there says that she really wishes that people would make a new mistake in social media, because we haven't seen one in over 25 years. Like every single time somebody screws something up, it's the same damn thing we've seen before. It's one of them, and it's like, here we go again. And she's right. Like, there are no new mistakes being made, and Musk is not making any new mistakes. He's just doing it quicker. And it's kind of too bad, but I think part of the problem is that he does want it to be worth more than he paid for it. And I think there's zero chance of that happening. I mean, not that it's impossible, but I don't even see a path at this point. Like maybe 10 years down the road, somebody strings together an amazing set of coincidences and pulls it off, but I have no idea how that's going to look like. And so, yeah, I think it's one of those deals where it's just, he's confused it for a fan base. And then when I was in business school, they told us like, there's a blind spot in business. Everybody in private equity thinks they understand retail because they shop. And I've noticed that everybody in politics think they understand education because they went to school. And I think Elon Musk thinks he understands social media because he uses it. And that's the critical error.
Killing the blue check marks in particular. That's one of the things I think you mentioned.
It's going to be the death knell, but not for the reason everybody thinks it is. And here's why. So the one thing, remember when I was talking about how Diggs' pitch was, hey, publish your crap on my site and you'll get clicks. Well, Twitter had the same pitch. Like that's where they got that from. And people did that. But what's happened since is the major media companies have realized this doesn't work. Twitter doesn't drive traffic. Like, it drives engagement on Twitter if that's what you want. But otherwise, it's not of any use if you want to try to pull stuff to your own site, not consistently anyway. And so the bigger guys have kind of figured this out. The thing that Twitter has that nobody else will be able to replicate is Twitter was the last company capable of fooling people to publish on a platform they don't own. And so because they still do, it still works. And there's a lot of journalists on there so that, they publish their own stuff and that kind of works. And there's a lot of celebrities on there and that will still works too. This will never happen again. And I don't think Musk realized that's what he's going to destroy, is the one thing that is actually unique about Twitter and will never be replicated. And that's why it's going to cause a lot of problems.
Let's talk about the future. Where do you see the internet going from here? You mentioned before about what you consider the 6 ages of the internet, like Web 1.0, Web 2.0. And I think you already mentioned a couple of them. Demand media was one.
The demand media era, and then there was post Panda after that, and then Facebook. Facebook taking over everything.
Yeah. What do you think the seventh age will be? The age of men? To use
I don't know. I mean, so here's the weird thing. Like, I know enough about AI to know that it's not ready for prime time. I'm also impressed with what I see at this point. So I think it's going to be some version of, maybe I'm really hoping for augmented humanity. Tell you the truth. Like, it's not AI taking over or whatever. I'm just hoping that AI makes people able to do their jobs better. Maybe some version of that. But like, especially like watching the Zoomers, like my own kids, like they don't want to get on Facebook. They don't even like TikTok. Like, they'll watch it a couple of times, but they're like, why would you put yourself out there like that? And like, let them have all your data. Like, why would you? We don't understand. My kids are all teenagers right now. So, I think it's going to be something new. And not only, I mean, I'm pretty sure of it just because if you think about it, like, this technology is not that old. Like, the web itself is only about 30, like this can't possibly be the final form of it, but where it ends up going, I'd be curious to see how it ends up.
Fark, you perceive it going as it's going now? Do you have any plans for changes that you can talk about, of course?
Yeah. So I actually have sort of a big back-end project, which this isn't going to change everything. It's just sort of an add-on. I actually can't talk about it, not because I'm unwilling to, but even like mentioning what it is sounds dumb. And I need like 15 minutes to defend it, and I don't have it. So, but it's something that somebody put a bug in my ear about 4 years ago. And I've been thinking about it ever since. And I'm like, it's one of those, like, I'm not convinced it would work, but if it did, it would be a game changer. So I'm kind of building it on the back end, trying to find maybe like somebody else who wants to take like a huge stab. But the problem is like, I have friends who are VCs and that same problem, like they can't wrap their heads around it. And they're like, you sure this is going to work? And I'm like, no, I don't know that's going to work. But man, if it did, like, it would really, like, it would be really hard for other people to actually like sort of copy, and everybody would want to do it. So I'm doing that on the back end. But other than that, it's like just sort of, floating through navigating the nuances of the news cycle and trying to figure out, where everybody's at from a relevance standpoint. We were talking a bit about like how during the Trump years, it was so difficult. Like, in fact, we suffered during that, and for the same reason I suffered during that, which was when Trump is like the top 3 to 5 lead stories every goddamn day. It really not only does it suck all the air out of the room, but it makes reading the news not fun. Like, you really just want to go like, can we read something about not Trump for a while? That'd be great. And man, I tried like hell to keep that off the main page of Fark, but I just couldn't, because every once in a while he'd, say, let's go to the moon and get all the cheese, or let's trade Puerto Rico for Greenland, or, whatever, like all the crazy ass crap that happened literally 5 times a day. Like, I swear, I felt like I was pulling like 80-hour weeks for 4 years. So I really hope that guy didn't come back, because I don't need it.
Let's go on to chat questions at this point.
Yeah.
Do you have any there, Aylin, that?
Yeah. Okay. So I can pull up a list of questions that we have. So I think Josh has asked, do you think social media companies extended their life by going after other countries?
So maybe. What's interesting is that at least the countries that I'm aware of, a lot of them had social media sites popping up. Like, remember when Google bought Orkut? That's a little obscure. They were huge in Brazil. So, you know, what's really wild is we found one that was a social media website that was kind of big in Russia that turns out was a copy of Fark. And I know I could prove this because there's a copy of Fark called fark.ru run by some folks that I know. Haven't seen them in a while. It's not worth making them stop, but there's been a Russian Fark for forever. Somebody copied that and made a social media network out of it. And I was just like, huh, that would have been a weird turn. So not necessarily launching any other ones. I mean, there are, I'm not aware of how often it happened, but I would be willing to bet that when other social media sites moved into other countries, they were able to extend their lives. In fact, I knew a guy who worked for a hedge fund that what he would do is he would look at anything that took off in the United States and then like go look for that thing taking off in a third world country and then invest a ton of money in it because it was like hitting it over and over and over again. So yeah. But generally speaking, the lifespan is only about 5 to 7 years from peak to trough, basically. I don't know why that is. It's fairly consistent, as it turns out. And the only way to extend it out is to have some kind of a weird aberration happen, like Trump pulling everybody back on, or Facebook just acquiring their competition.
Some more questions, if you would, Aylin, please.
Okay. So let's see. I think there was a question. I'm just going in chronological order. There was a question from Matthew asking about your users or your audience, and they were saying, speaking of second generation, how many users are known to be kids of OG users?
Yeah, so actually I don't know that any of them are. I mean, that can't be true. But to my knowledge, they're not. What I think has happened is that, like, so I've done it. I do college speaking, like not a ton, like maybe like half a dozen times a year, but I always kind of gauge it based on the reaction I get. And lately, when I like every single time now, nobody's heard of Fark because they're all like 19 years old. But when they go on it, they're like, this is fun. I like this. And that's not like 10 years ago, you weren't getting that. They were like, well, that's okay, but it's not, I don't see like chicks in bikinis on here like I do on Facebook. So yeah, it's, I don't know what percentage of them is kids of the OGs. But it can't be zero, but I don't know that it's most of them either. I'm not really sure.
Okay. And we have another question from Josh that says, in my opinion, the internet went from nerdland to real life in the early 2010s. Do you think Equal Time for Nut Jobs became the lit cigarette in the gas-filled room of the 2010s? Eternal September.
Nice
I
analogy.
I have a different observation about that. I think it's funny that all of the things, like when I told my parents in college and out of college that I was going to meet people that I met online, all of the things they warned me about, they fell for when they got on social media, which I find really fascinating. Think about it. Every single one, like, how do you know if anything's true? And then 10 years later, it's like, again, it's like, they're just passing around all the misinformation. I mean, my parents are liberal and they were like, I heard the COVID vaccine messes your DNA up. And I was just like, man, like, you guys are dumb. I mean, I guess that's why they warned us, because they knew how stupid they were. I don't know. But I think that was the main problem is that those of us that were online first were a little wiser to it. And then the next generation that came in, and I'm going to throw millennials and boomers under a bus at the same time, we're susceptible, I guess. I don't know. I can't explain it, but literally all the things they warned us about, they fell for. It's kind of wild.
Yeah. Makes me sort of wonder if we are building any sort of cultural sort of antibodies against it. If, the next generation might actually use the internet more responsibly. And then if that does happen, I'm sure the generation after that will go back to being stupid about it again.
It might be. Yeah. Like my kids, like their preferred method of communication online is Discord by a long shot. Like there's not really a close second, which I find interesting because it's utility based. It does what they need it to do. It's kind of neat.
Yeah, I'm on a ton of Discord, but I actually hate it because it's not searchable from outside of Discord, and it's all locked up within that ecosystem.
That's why my kids like it. They're like, great, nobody will find us. This is perfect.
Yeah, but the future generations, it'll just be a big black box to them.
Yeah, who knows what everybody's going to like is the thing. I will say this, it's like one of the things that always kind of blew me away about social media was this issue of you got to be on there so you can be relevant and you can gain followers and for what? I mean, that's the question nobody ever asked. Like, what are you going to do with those? Like, you got a full-time job doing, something normal. you got 1,000 followers on Twitter. What's that good for? What do you get out of that? Like anything, I mean, I don't understand why. And my kids are in the same boat. They're like, we don't know what we would do with that. That doesn't make any sense.
Another question?
We have a question from Wheelie Man saying, whatever happened to the Fark podcast?
Yeah, so we had a couple different iterations of that actually. Hold on, pour another glass of wine here. So we had a couple different iterations. One of them was with a friend of mine locally that we did, and it just wasn't gaining traction was the main thing. And we were all busy. Then we did one, I did one with Todd Schnitt for a while. The problem there is that it didn't, the focus of the subject matter, he really liked idiots in the news, which I don't mind that either. But I came to realize that there's a lot of idiots in the news that are like, have got like mental issues. Like it's like if you're making poor decisions, I can get behind that all day long. Like the kids in college today carrying around what do they call them? The giant gallon jugs that are full of electrolytes and vodka. The Borg. Yeah, there you go, Borg. Yeah, somebody got in the comments. Yeah, like so. Okay, I can make fun of that all day long. That's great because they're doing that willingly. But the problem is like you got somebody like who's got schizophrenia. Like running out into an alligator pond in Florida. It's a little bit tragic at the end of the day. Like it's stupid that they did it, but they weren't in the right mind. And it's kind of like, man. And I got to tell you too, like having watched how the cultural consciousness has shifted over the last 20 years. I mean, I guarantee you there was stuff I thought was hilarious 20 years ago that isn't funny anymore. So, and I understand this, like that's how it goes. But Neil Dash said something really cool that has kind of stuck with me about this. Said that you still need to keep up with it because the price of relevance is fluency. So you have to, if you want to be relevant, you got to be fluent. So none of this, like you can't make a joke about the R word anymore. It's like, yeah, because we've changed our discussion about these topics. So like part of what we're trying to do with Fark is navigate that as best we can. And I'm going to be terrible at it. I'm a 50-year-old white dude who's not paying attention, who lives in Kentucky. I'm the absolute worst, but I do want to do it right. And I give it my best shot. And most of our moderators are women, so they keep me in check, which is great. Cause they know way better than I do about what won't fly. So there you go.
Do we have any other questions? I think that's the end of the list of questions.
I actually did have a question, especially when you were talking about moderation, Drew. So I was actually wondering what Fark's operating expenses are. And you said one way of being financially sustainable is to spend as little as possible. So for MetaFilter, like most of MetaFilter spending goes towards staffing, which is like 80% and mostly moderation.
Yeah.
And also web hosting, which is like about 14%. So what are Fark's expenses like, and how do they compare to like your income or your profits?
Yeah, pretty similar to that actually. And then profits are loosey goosey because like I own 100% of it. So like you get into this weird spot where if there's anything left over today, I could potentially, that's my take home, except it's a terrible idea because if I pull it out, it's a taxable event and then I can't pull it back in if something goes to hell. So I'm trying to build a war chest up because about every 3 to 5 years, something happens that damn near kills us. So I'm trying to basically keep enough on hand to survive the next whatever. And so like, and there's another one coming up actually, like there's a possibility that, and I don't believe this is how it's going to play out, but like the entire media ecosystem is focused on what happens when cookies go away because advertisers have been trained to buy everybody's privacy, which I have a big problem with, but that's what they pay for. And they're saying that they won't pay for it once that's gone. Well, if that's true, we're screwed. And not only that, but all these layoffs you're seeing, like that's a direct result of them anticipating this coming down the pike. So I'm like, here we go again, maybe like, so we'll just kind of hang on and see how it goes. But yeah, more or less that's the answer to the question though, is that we just kind of, try to just kind of float along. The nice thing is I don't have to, it's me. So like, I don't have to like have a group of people agree with anything, or we don't have to get into fights about how to divvy things up. And so, like I said, most of the time I'm just rebuilding a war chest is basically what's going on.
Yeah, we talked with Ryan North a couple of days ago. He used to run a an ad service actually called Project Wonderful. That their whole thing was trying to do ads in a non-evil way, not tracking people. It's one of the things we talked about was in their best form, it feels like ads are almost a service because they point you to new sites that you might not otherwise have seen.
Yes.
But Project Wonderful isn't around anymore, and he had he had a couple of events that eventually ended up joining them. I talked with him about whether he thought it could possibly make a go now, and I think he was thoughtful about that. What do you think?
So there's a couple of problems there. One, the advertising industry is incredibly stupid. They literally just spend all their time trying to figure out what's the thing that we can convince everybody works that's just made up bullshit. And then we'll sell that for a while and then we'll come up with some other thing. So you're dealing with that on the back end, is that's how the industry functions. But one of the things that they've kind of forgotten is that there's multiple kinds of advertising, and there's two major ones. So one is direct, which is I only want to advertise towards people who are going to respond. So like that would be if I'm Best Buy and I'm selling iPads, I only want to reach people who want to buy iPads. That's a legitimate form of advertising. However, there's a second form where most of the spend happens. And I don't know why this isn't classified differently. I mean, maybe the brands think about it differently, but is straight up brand advertising. So that'd be like the World Cup where the Budweiser logo is sprayed everywhere. Brand advertising is a go wide strategy. They don't need to know that you like beer to target you. They're literally trying to be everywhere so that when you think beer, you think Budweiser. And in that model, I think the pitch would be, and I don't know how you do this, but if you could get the brand advertisers in a room, they'd probably get on board with that because they don't need to target. They're trying to carpet bomb. And, but again, the problem is that the industry is stupid. So I don't know how you get them all in a row, but that would be the direction I would take it if I could.
We're about at the end of the scheduled time, and I don't have a lot of notes left. Are there any other questions from chat before we wrap this up? See if we can come up with anything real quick. While we are waiting, let me have a look at my notes. How about, what do you think about ChatGPT and other, as they call it, AI? I mean, on one level, it sounds to me just like basically Eliza 2.0. That shows you how old I am.
Pretty much.
But do you think this has any sort of a role in internet content going forward?
Possibly. So I've been messing with it because I really like this new stuff. I usually jump in and try to figure it out. Like I designed a cryptocurrency a couple of years ago, which I never launched because I was like, this is a total scam. This is ridiculous. And we can just track this using a ledger anyway. So whatever. But the GPT has been fascinating because it is very good at generating large amounts of mostly relevant content. And by that, I mean, like, if you ask it to like, hey, give me a paragraph on blah, it'll spit one out and it'll be like, well, that's close. And I've talked to a couple of other news media sites about it that are experimenting with using it. And every single one of them says that when they use it to write content, it's never good on the first go, but it's close. And so, and that's way faster so that's going to allow them to generate news articles about stuff quicker. And as long as it isn't the bad versions, like, because like I think we can all tell when we're reading an AI generated article from one of the previous generations of it. And I'm not saying you can't from GPT-4, but it's better. So I think that I could see it as a content assist, maybe. Like what I would really like it to see is that if you could, like, instead of generate me 2,000 words on something, if it could instead go, can you generate me the best explanation of what the hell this is in 100? Like now we're talking. Like that actually might be kind of fascinating, but I'm not sure that we're at that point yet.
Any more questions, Aylin?
Well, we had the question about Fark's redesign, and we have
That's a good one.
Yeah, okay, I'll ask that. When
That's
Fark
funny.
it's from Matthew. When Fark had the major redesign, how long did it take for people to get over it, in quotes?
So one thing we learned, so we did a major redesign in 2007. And honestly, I mean, it wasn't that big. The site still functioned well, but it did look a lot different. But we'd never done one before. So like, and it made all the first time errors, which was like, well, we'll just do a redesign and then, and we're good. We're done. We can go party. Like we just let this thing fly. There'll be no bugs after we launch this thing and it'll be fine. And then everybody really wanted a reason to get mad about it. So, but also on top of it, so my wife has been kind of the community manager for a while, and she's got a background in psychology, and she identified something fascinating when she took over a few years ago, which is, she calls it, oh God, what is it? It's the, like, you've heard people talk about being on the spectrum, right? And usually they're referring to autism, but there's sort of a, I can't remember what she called it exactly, like a psychonormative spectrum where essentially like, we're all different. Like and not only are we all different, we're all profoundly different and we don't realize it. And case in point, this is my takeaway from things that she's told me is I think that you could easily say that about 25% of people, if you go over to their house and you start turning around stuff on their mantle backwards, they're going to lose their mind. Because there's a lot of OCD people out there. Well, if you live online and somebody moves all your crap around in your online living room, you're going to get pretty bent about that, especially if you surprise them with it. So, which is what we did, not realizing. So what we do now is actually we do, and my wife says like, I shouldn't call it this, and it's not off color, but it's not a good term. We do redesign by gaslighting, which is essentially, we don't do big redesigns anymore. We just trickle this crap in. Like every couple of years, I jack the font up 2 points because we've discovered that if I jack the font up 1 point, people notice. It's very strange. And I think the reason why is we've all seen things in 12, 14, 16, and 18 point font, but nobody uses 17. And we could just tell because people are like, man, something's wrong. Why is this a 17 point font? Like they can't tell it is, but they can tell something's wrong. So what we've been doing now is anytime we have a series of changes, I start kind of rolling them through. Like I'll change the border and then we'll tweak the color. Like if we make a big background color change, I'll do it over the course of 3 months, just slowly like turning the light down. And then like then people are pretty much used to it at that point. The other way to do it is put things in there that people can back out. Be like, hey, we just changed everything, but here's the old site. Keep using it if you want. But what happened when we did that redesign is of course everybody's just going nuts and screaming. And Jeff, who was our head moderator at the time, popped in and said, "You'll get over it," which of course made everybody really mad. But the funny thing is that about a week later, one of the funnier sidebars to that is that there was a guy who basically said, "Hey, if you're never coming back to Fark, I want your name and your login name," and he's creating a spreadsheet for it. And it turns out the reason he was doing it, ostensibly was doing it so he could send it to us to be like, you guys screwed up. What he was actually doing was he was writing down the names. So when those people who said they were gone forever came back, he could show them that they were on that spreadsheet. So it ended up being really, really funny at the end of the day. So yeah, most people eventually like, yeah, we got over it. But that said, we definitely could have handled that better. And we have been, like I said, we've been redesigning through gaslighting for years now and nobody's noticed. It's kind of worked out.
Another question?
That was really funny. So we have a question from Josh saying, so is asking pay for service dead now because a generation has been taught things are free on the internet?
So it depends. Part of your problem is there's no easy way to do that. Google had a thing that I wish had taken off. But I could see why it didn't, just because again, Google's an ad company, right? So they had this project called, I think it was called Contributor or something. And it was an interesting idea. And I really wish this had taken off. And the idea is that you would throw Google $5 and then you would bid against ads in the system. And if you won, you wouldn't see any. And the reason why I thought this was fascinating is because if you could actually do that in today's ecosystem and you gave $5 a month, you would never see ads. That's how little these things clear in the auction system. So I really wanted that to succeed, but I think Google killed it because advertisers are like, what are you guys doing here? That's not really cool. So the paid model does work in specific spots. So for example, like Netflix, obviously. But then you've got like other ones, like I'm a cyclist and I use Strava and I pay a subscription for that. I don't think everybody does. I think freemium is probably the way to go actually, but, I think that it isn't that it's dead. You're right that people expect it to be free, but they don't mind paying for it as long as you can make it frictionless. Like nobody wants to sign up for an account, but if I could and people have tried versions of this, so this isn't specifically the answer, but if I could load up a thing that would just sort of throw tokens at you while I was cruising through the internet, I'd be cool with that. But also I don't want to have to load tokens into it. So the basic problem is there's been not really an easy way to make that work. But then if you look at things like how Twitch does subscriptions or how YouTube does subscriptions, that's a fascinating model right there. Because you don't got to subscribe to those. You could totally just watch that. But those guys are like, you're a subscriber. And granted, they have the advantage of being a fan base if you're a YouTube star. So people are more likely to cough up money. But I think that there's something probably there. But as I've been talking to other mainstream news companies, these were not the people that said this to me, but one of them is why am I going to subscribe to USA Today? Because I don't care about them. I don't know anybody over there. I don't love them. They're not my local guys. They will beg you to sign up for a subscription, but they're like, why the hell would I ever do that? It's a big monolithic company that I have no sort of connection to. So I think the connection matters. The fan base side of things probably makes it, and then utility. If you're giving people something that they actually need. So like on Strava, you get extra health data, which most people don't need. But so yeah, I don't think the paid model is dead, but you're never going to have a full paid model. I think a hybrid is probably where this probably lands at the end of the day. Oh, but here, let me, before we end this, let's end this on this and let me segue in. This, by the way, for everybody who's watching, is why you need to pay for that voluntary ticket that these guys put up in order to do this video event, because that's literally the whole point of this, is to keep MetaFilter around, because you guys want them to be around in the next 20 years, right? And you're probably like me and you're like, man, I don't know. It's like, it just never occurred to me to kick them $5 or $10, but this is why you have to do it. And not only that, but what's crazy is like, if just like 5% of the readership paid for a subscription or even like one of these videos, you guys would be done. Like that'd be it. Like that's all you would need to run this thing forever. I mean, same thing with us. It's like, it's less than 1% of our readers sign up. So it actually makes a huge difference. So I always tell people, it's like, if you have a media property or somebody you follow who does like a podcast or anybody, literally like actually like take a little bit of time, like go out there and actually do sign up. It totally moves the needle and allows people to do this stuff. And maybe it'll keep MetaFilter and Fark and all of these things that are awesome around for another 25 years. It'd be pretty cool if it did.
Yeah, I had a quick question. I think does Fark pay moderators as staff?
We pay them a side hustle salary because you have to in order to be able to tell them what to do.
Mm.
So, but nobody's full time, so it's mostly like a side hustle for everybody.
Oh, do we want to call it here then?
Yeah. Yeah, take care. I'm gonna keep drinking. See ya.